Welcome, and thanks for stopping by. Whether you're watching us on YouTube or listening to our podcast on one of your favorite platforms, I'm glad you're here. At this time, I would like to thank our partners and sponsors for their dedication to helping the show to grow. We cannot do what we do without their help. Hey, everybody, you reached the Millennium Beat. I'm your host, Kevin James. Today, I have on the computer with me Kyle Jetsel. Kyle, thanks very much for being on today.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Kevin.
Hey, let's find out a little bit about Kyle. Let's start from the very beginning. Where were you originally born from?
So you probably hear, as I talk, you'll probably hear what I call a Texas ghetto accent. It's because I was born in inner city Dallas in a little area called Oak Cliff, and it's kind of a rougher neighborhood. So I kind of grew up in that area, but and as soon as I could, I moved out once I married my wife in 1991.
I've been to Texas, and we've talked about it to other people. I've been there. Once I drove a friend that lived in Arlington, Texas. I drove from Massachusetts through Charlotte, North Carolina, to Dallas, and then to Arlington. And then I flew out of there. And then I flew back once to visit her. And then I flew once there to go to Louisiana to my nephew's wedding. And I had to spend overnight because Dallas, I missed my plane in Dallas because it had left before I even got there. So I don't know a lot about Texas. Eventually I want to get there. So that's cool. So it was a different type of growing up then. So you grew up, you got married, and you got the heck out of Dodge.
Yeah, I grew up in kind of a rough neighborhood. So a lot of the things that I was taught as a young man were, the violence and the threat of violence was a very good motivator. Mm-hmm. And so when I married my wife, I really looked for a very calming, sweet, feminine, pretty much a Southern belle to kind of, I think, help me balance out some of that part of my life.
Okay. Right. Now, did it balance it?
She did a wonderful job with me.
Did it balance?
She did. Okay. She must have seen that I could be worked with, and really, and I think she liked that I was I'll call it full of testosterone, right, to match her femininity. Right. My masculinity was probably a little bit too much. Okay, and her femininity was overboard as well. My wife was about the most feminine woman you'd ever want to meet, and so I think it worked out well. Yeah, she brought me towards where I probably should have been.
Right. Now I'm thinking of, she was the prime example of a Southern belle. I can imagine like the old Southern dress, and maybe the, what do they call it, the umbrella. I mean, that's what I see. I'm not saying she was that, but that's what I see in my mind. And when you say a nice, petite, feminine Southern girl, old woman, So she gave you a balance. She saw the potential in you, I think.
Yeah, I think she did. And it didn't take her long to she realized where I was from, and she knew kind of what I was about. Mm-hmm. And I think she, in her sweet feminine way, realized that I could be molded into a good man, right? I think through the way she worked me and treated me and loved on me, I think that was her plan from the beginning. I didn't really know she was doing that until, years and years later, when I realized I met some friends that I had grown up with, resaw some friends that I had grown up with 15 years later, and they said, "Boy, you are different."
So she kind of help mold you. So that's pretty good. So basically, what was going on in the early part of your marriage life? From like, because you said you got married in '91, so this is 2023. So I know your story a little bit. We'll get into it, but what happened in the early days of marriage? What was it like?
So in the early days of our marriage, we started having kids, and we had a couple of boys, typical boys. They were wild
Okay,
animals because that's kind of how boys are. And we were doing
right,
pretty well. And when our third son came along, he was quite a bit different. And it turns out he was diagnosed as severe on the autism spectrum. And this was 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago. And it
okay,
kind of dramatically changed our family. And with severe autism comes a lot of unique challenges. And by that I mean, if you imagine, you've heard of some horror stories of autism,
right,
violence, breaking things, tearing things up, screaming, yelling. We were struggling with this as a family because our third son was more severe on the spectrum and was nonverbal at the time and really couldn't communicate. And it created so much stress
okay,
in our home because we weren't managing it very well that it started to cause
right,
some conflict between my wife and I. And over a
okay,
period of time, I realized that a lot of my past experience in how I manage things, right, growing up rough and growing up
hmm
in a physical and I'd say almost violent environment sometimes teaches you that physicality and the
okay,
threat of violence and those things is how to solve problems. And that was really making things worse in our family. And so
right,
it kind of came to a head, and we had a real big my wife and I had a real big argument where I was ready to leave my family and she wanted me to leave. And I think we got to this impasse
wow,
between the two of us where our family was so stressed out, and we were in such conflict. She was such a beautiful, feminine, kind person, and I was trying to manage things through the threats, and controlling things, that I realized that she had lost
right,
faith in my ability to parent and to be a good husband.
okay,
And so I kind of through a series of events made a decision that I needed to change myself. My kids weren't the problem and my wife wasn't the problem. I was the problem. And I needed to
hmm
look at a better way to manage myself and my family. And that was really when I kind of went
okay,
on a journey to become the husband that she needed me to be and become the father my kids needed to be. And I didn't
okay,
want to leave. I knew that wasn't the right thing to do. And so
hmm
I kind of made it my quest to become, I'll call it the greatest dad ever, right? And to solve the family problems we were facing.
I think I can see, imagine, I can remember a cup, like a mug, a coffee mug that says greatest dad ever. I see you getting that, getting that, greatest dad. So it was, you're willing to change and become the better husband, the better father, which is cool. I mean, that's really good. So that was in the part of the early part of your marriage and stuff like that. And how long? Unfortunately, as you said, you'll say in the story that your wife passed away. How long were you married before that happened?
So this was in the first 10 years of our marriage. We came to that impasse where, because of the
Okay.
stress, we were just in trouble. But as I really started to realize that, when you grow up in that atmosphere, you think that, you know strength is being a man and fighting and right, being scary and all those things
Right.
that some people think that is. But it took a lot more strength for me to be passive and kind and loving in those escalated situations, right? And so over the next
hmm
over the next 10 years or so, through a lot of just work on my part and through a patient, loving, kind wife, we were able to
hmm
repair that relationship. And I think
Good.
probably in our 20th year of marriage, I'll never forget one night. We used to sit in bed, and we had really started to come together, and things, even though we were still facing those autism challenges and still facing life, right, and still hard, she and I had become so
hmm
close. And so what our marriage had become what she and I referred to as a top 1% happy marriage. And I'll never forget
Okay.
talking to her one night, and we were sitting in bed, kind of chatting about the kids and what was coming up and what was going to happen. And she turned to me and her eyes got teared up and she said, "You really love me, don't you?" And I'll never forget. At first I was confused because we'd been married now for 20 years and I had, fought for our marriage and I had like changed myself to the core to make her and the kids happy and to be a good dad. And it kind of shocked me that she wouldn't be sure of that up until this point, right? I was thinking, how can you even say that? How could you even question that? And it made me realize that in that moment that, sometimes it takes years for, I don't know really what maybe subconscious fears she had or concerns or worries, but in that moment I realized now she knew. And that was a pivotal point in our relationship because it made me understand that through those 20 years that she stayed with me and she was patient with me and kind and loved me, she wasn't sure to her core that I loved her. And that really was a pivotal moment for me because it gave me confidence that she knew in her core that I loved her. And for the next, 10 years of our marriage was probably the most beautiful 10 years of our marriage at that point.
I've done a little study psychology wise. I come from a psychologist family. There's a book called Love Languages. It's by Gary Chapman, Dr. Gary Chapman. I don't know if you ever heard of it. And it deals with love languages. And I think once you get to know your wife or your husband's love language, because if you go through life and your love language of your wife is quality time, but you're always working, you never spend any time for it. You could be paying all the bills and giving her the nice house and the nice car, but her love language is quality time. She doesn't think you love her because you don't spend any time with her because you're so busy doing other things for her. So somehow, whether you knew it or not, you must have clicked onto her love language. And then she now says, "Hey, I feel the love. My tank is being full." So, I mean, whether you mentally did it, knowing it or not, you kind of did.
Yeah, when you focus on your wife and kids and decide I'm going to be the greatest husband ever or the greatest dad, it's not a destination; it's really a journey. And so, yeah, I read that book along with probably 100 other ones. So you're right.
Sure.
You're right. And I realized that to become what I wanted to be, other people, everybody, there's so many books out there. There's so many great things that you can read
of course there is.
And find that. Why would I not, if my goal is to be that, why would I not go find every book I could find and apply everything I could? And I think you're right that it wasn't just the reading of them though. More than anything, it was the application of them and just saying, what can I do?
Right.
What piece of this book am I going to take out and apply in my life right now? And I think to the end you're talking about, that is really what gave her those feelings. And I think with our wives, a lot of time it's the effort that really matters, right? Whether we achieve a goal or not, whether I became the greatest dad or the greatest husband ever is immaterial compared to the fact that she knew I was putting in the effort. Right. And I think that is what gets you, those feelings.
Yeah, and it also gets you those brownie points. And
there you go.
It's kind of like my pastor and his wife, and he was going through a funk, and she goes, I'll be there with you. I'll live under a bridge. You just got to have a goal. You gotta press through, and I'll be standing by you, and stuff. So you basically, that was like the first 10 years we went on, and the next 10 years. So that brings you up to 2001 to 2010. So that was 2020. So you basically, your wife passed away just in the last couple of years then.
She did. My wife passed away a few months after our 30th anniversary.
So we'll get into that. How did you deal with it then? How are you dealing with it now? Because death and I've never had a personal wife, or I've had parents and grandparents and stuff like that. But how were you dealing with that situation?
Well, I'll start by saying you never really get through it, but you work, right? And I will. Right. I would suggest to you that the same process that I used whenever I decided that I needed to become a better man for my wife and kids was the same process, that when you start to learn, I think a lot of our life is learning frameworks, right? Where do I go? Who do I look for? What can I find? to help me. And I,
Right.
when my wife passed away, I realized this can destroy a family, right? This could destroy
Oh
my
yeah.
kids. It could destroy me. That is possible. And I was determined that would not happen. And so I knew I wasn't the only person that it had happened to. And my kids weren't the
Hmm.
only kids to lose their mother. And so, that sent me on a journey of interviewing people that had lost their parents, that had lost their mothers and fathers, or fathers, kids. I mean, I talked to hundreds of people. I grabbed books, I started reading them, and I really, through that, was able to craft a plan, right? I think too
Okay.
often in our lives, when we're faced with things, when the storm hits us, we're so caught up in the storm that we don't have a plan for escaping the storm, or at least facing it with strength and courage, right? And faith.
Hmm.
And so once it
Right.
hit, immediately I started doing the research and I started crafting a plan with each of my kids, with myself. What was I going to do each night to help me cope, to help me feel her
Hmm.
love, to help me thrive in that situation, and to continue. She wouldn't want me to fall apart. She wouldn't want our family to fall apart. What she would want is for us to live our best lives and truly be, excel in the areas that we can. And so, I set my kids down and we talked about this stuff, and and I told them, I'm putting together a plan and you guys are going to be a part of it. I'd like you to join me in
Hmm.
working to make her proud and living fun, full, happy lives. And so, I think one of the things I think we fail to do too often is when we're in the storm, we almost think, when the storm is over, or I can't wait till the storm is over, right? And we don't really
Right.
do anything. We just wait, and certainly time can help heal those things. But I'm not that kind of
Right.
person, right? If something's happening and I see a challenge, if I'm facing a huge storm and I see a challenge, I'd rather start to work. Work
Hmm.
helps me, working on it or trying to figure something out, a plan of action gives me faith, and it gives me hope, and it gives me strength. I'm not the kind that likes to sit in the storm and just
Okay.
be battered and beaten. And so I think, one of the things that I did do,
Right.
and you and I think probably it's one of the reasons we're talking, is I documented, every night I would sit down and write in my journal, and I
Okay.
documented my thoughts and my feelings and my actions, and how I was going to face this tragedy, and what I was going to do to
Mhm.
continue to live a happy, full, buoyant, exciting life,
Right.
right? And so that really
Hmm.
leads me to what you and I talked about, which is I wrote a book, and it's called 180 Days Facing My Biggest Fear, and I call it that because prior to my wife's passing, a few years prior to her passing, my brother and I were just having a conversation between two brothers. You know how you just talk with your brother about silly stuff and a bunch of nothingness. And he hit me
Right.
with this question. He said, "What's your biggest fear, Kyle?" And without batting an eye, without even thinking about it, I said, "Losing Shelly, my wife." And
Right.
and we just talked about different things, and I didn't really think about it much more after that until she passed away. And I realized in that moment,
Right.
I was facing my biggest fear. What's the biggest fear I could
Hmm.
face? And so, yeah, that book is. I'm going to give you a link, and I'm happy for you to post it. It's just a PDF document.
Okay.
It's my journey for the first 180 days, 6 months after my wife passed away, and our plan, and what we
Okay.
did, and what I thought, and some pretty deep, painful thoughts, and some pretty exciting thoughts, and all those things that really carried me through those
Mhm.
first 6 months after her passing.
Um, I know we'll have that link for the PDF and stuff like that. If some of the other listeners or viewers wanted to get a hold of you, what do you want to share publicly? Any emails or any websites or anything like that? How can people get a hold of you? Because they might be going through the same situation. They need it. They know where the PDF will be, but anything else, where do they go?
Yeah, so my contact information is in the PDF, but also if you want to reach out to me, you can email me at any time at I call myself Kyle at drivenautismdad.com. And that's my email. I call myself the driven autism dad.
Right.
It's kind of a moniker I placed on myself, you know, 20 years ago, right? When I realized I needed to be driven, I needed to work, I needed to face these challenges head on. And if my life was going to change, it was up to me to change it. And I really do believe that event with my kids prepared me and made me the kind of guy that could face this tragedy, the tragedy that I've struggled with my wife, because it set the framework for me to be able to face these things and realize that it's not really what happens to us in life that really defines who we are, right? We get to write. Things are going to happen to all of us. We're all going to face struggles and tragedy and difficulties. And we've all heard this before. It's how we react to that. And what do we do in response to that really is the part of our life's movie that we get to write. And so, I call myself the driven autism dad, and I'm just the driven dad, and I'm the driven husband. But yeah, Kyle at Driven Autism Dad is how you can contact me via email. But I'm driven to still, and again, it's a journey to be the best dad I can be for, my kids who are still here with me, and to give them every opportunity to thrive through this tragedy. One of the things I found that was very interesting, and I'll share this because it was really powerful for my kids. I found an article that claimed that a high percentage of our presidents and the presidents of the United States and individuals who had achieved a very high level of success had lost one of their parents at an early age. And in going back and reviewing and looking at all those individuals, the thing that was the commonality among all those individuals is that, they looked at this not as a tragedy that couldn't be overcome. They said, you know what? One of the worst things in the world just happened to me. I lost my mom at an early age. What else is the world going to throw at me that I can't handle, right? I'm going to go after the world, and I'm going to throw caution to the wind, because nothing else you can throw at me is going to be worse than this, right? And so it was interesting. I shared this with my kids, months after my wife passed away, and their eyes lit up, right? And I could see that they understood this can be a barrier or a challenge that can affect them and hurt them throughout their lives, or it can be a challenge or barrier or event that can propel them. And so we talked about how your mother would want this to propel you, right? Your mother, that's what she would want. And I'm sure that's what you want. So let it be the fuel that rockets you into, your best self, and not the, the hammer that damages you and keeps you stuck in the same spot.
Okay.
So,
well, that kind of goes into my next question. But in closing, you've said a few things already. But if I'm listening or watching and I just lost somebody, I know that you can't get them through all the steps and stuff like that. But get them on the road. What would you say to them if you were talking to me and I just lost a wife, or I lost a mother or father or brother or whatever, lost somebody? What would you say to them just to get going, to get them on that road? What would you say to them?
I would say two things. One is don't feel like you have to do it alone, right? People love you. Connect with those people, call those people, talk to them, stay very connected to those people quite a bit. If you isolate, your mind will take over and you will spin, and it can be very difficult to escape that challenge. The second thing is don't wait any longer to draft a plan. Sit down and write. Sit down and write to yourself that what is the challenge, right? Whatever it is, write it out and write out the things that it can teach you. Even write down the ways it can damage you, right? Let's be honest with ourselves here. Write down all the things that you can learn or that can hurt you in this situation, but also write down what you want to get out of it. What's the good stuff you want to get out of it, right? Napoleon Hill, he wrote Think and Grow Rich. I'm sure you're familiar with it.
Yep.
He says, for every tragedy or challenge or trial we face in our lives is the seed of equivalent or greater value, right? And the seed, it's not that no matter what we face, we're going to get something that's parallel in greatness. It's the seed of equivalent value. Our job is to nurture that seed, right? And so it's to, if we write down what do we want to get out of this, or how do we want to grow, or who do we want to become from this event, and then write down a series of steps. What am I going to do today or tomorrow or the next day, every day, to achieve that greater person that I can become? That is what I think you can do. And if you get my book, you'll read that was what I was doing, right? I wasn't content to sit in the storm and just get battered and beaten and bruised and destroyed, because it's easy to do that.
Right.
It's easy to blame the world or blame God or blame, you want to blame somebody, but and you can fall into a trap, and it can overwhelm you and take you places that are unhealthy for you and for those you love. So stay connected, number one. Number two, don't wait any longer to create a plan. Sit down and write down how you're going to grow, what you're going to learn, and be intentional about those things. And what steps are you going to take to get every beautiful thing and every positive thing and every way you can grow possible. And that would be, in a nutshell, that would be my two recommendations: is don't wait. Don't wait until you recover. Face the storm head on, start writing it out, and that will help you recover.
Right.
Along with the connection of other people will help you face that storm in faith and courage and strength, because other people are rooting for you. Give them a chance to root for you and let them help you.
Okay. That is good advice to the people that are watching and listening. We've learned a lot today. We learned a lot about Kyle. We've learned a lot about breathing and going through some of the process and stuff like that. So, Kyle, I'd like to thank you very much for being on today's show. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, Kevin. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, everybody else, you've been listening to the Millennium Beat with your host, Kevin James. I'm glad that you stopped in today. And remember, we like to encourage the world one story at a time.
This has been a Millennium Beat LLC production. Views and opinions of the guest are not always the views and opinions of the Millennium Beat LLC. Check us out on social media, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, and TikTok at the Millennium Beat, or on Twitter at Millennium_Beat. If you would like to partner with us to reach the world, go to our website for more information. You can go to themillenniumbeat.com or tmb2000.net. Your financial support is greatly appreciated. We couldn't do all we do without your support. The Millennium Beat just updated our website from the ground up. Check it out at themillenniumbeat.com, or you can get there by using millenniumbeat.com or tmb2000.net, where you'll be redirected to the millenniumbeat.com's homepage. I want to thank Mass Inbound for their awesome work on our website. If you're looking for somebody to build your site, I recommend them. You can reach them at massinbound.com. That is massinbound.com. These are some of the things that you can find on our website. Homepage. You can watch our latest YouTube video or listen to our audio podcast. Also listed are some of the platforms our audio podcast is on. You'll find out when the next podcast will air and who the guest will be. On the top right, you will find two red buttons: Learn How to Help and Become a Guest. Under Learn How to Help, you can become a partner, sponsor, contributor, or contribute to the future Millennium Bus. You can give one time or monthly recurring. The choice is yours. The other button is Be a Guest. Click it, go to the form, and fill it out, and we will get back to you. We would love to hear your story. Click the About Us drop-down where you'll find stats, where we are reaching people, and to find more information on our sponsors. Click on the podcast drop-down, then click on the calendar tab where it will tell you when the shows will air and who will be on them. Or if you need to know about any meetups of the Millennium Beat staff, partners, or listeners. Also, there might be on the calendar an event at which the Millennium Beat staff will be at. Click the Guest tab for all previous guests, links to their website, social media pages, and any store they might have. Click the Forms drop-down. There you'll find a release, Be a Guest, or Become a Sponsor form.